58 minutes. That is how long one YouTube thumbnail claimed it took for a 20-year-old from Manila to demolish the world #1. Except that match never happened. And that might be the most terrifying part of this story for Aryna Sabalenka, because when you look at what Alex Eala has actually done over the past 12 months, the fiction barely outpaces the reality. Let me take you back to March 2025. A 19-year-old wildcard ranked 140th in the world steps onto the hard courts of Miami, and within the space of 8 days, she dismantles 3 Grand Slam champions on her way to a semifinal nobody outside the Philippines saw coming. That player was Alexandra Eala, a left-hander trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy since the age of 13, coached by Joan Bosch, and quietly carrying the weight of an entire nation's tennis ambitions on her shoulders. She arrived in Miami as an afterthought, a name casual fans scrolled past on the draw sheet. She left as the biggest story in women's tennis. But here is what the highlight reels do not show you. They do not show the solitary practice sessions on Christmas Eve, just days before flying to Melbourne, where she drilled forehands under the guidance of Nadal's coaching staff, while the rest of the world was unwrapping presents. They do not show the years at the academy in Mallorca, away from her family in the Philippines, grinding through junior tournaments and satellite events in relative obscurity. The 2025 Miami run did not materialize from thin air. It was the product of thousands of invisible hours, and when the moment arrived, Eala was ready for it in a way that stunned even the players she was beating. Consider what she did to Iga Swiatek in those Miami quarterfinals. The pole was the defending champion and the world #2. Eala broke her serve 8 times. 8. She neutralized Swiatek's signature heavy topspin by standing inside the baseline and taking the ball early, refusing to be pushed back into defensive rallies. The final scoreline read 6-2, 7-5, and Swiatek later admitted that Eala's aggression had caught her completely off guard. That victory made Eala the first Filipino in history to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. She lost to Jessica Pegula in 3 tight sets in the semis, but the result was almost secondary. The world had noticed. In the months that followed, Eala continued to climb. She became the first Filipino player in the Open era to win a main draw match at a Grand Slam when she defeated Clara Tauson at the 2025 US Open in a match so dramatic it nearly defied belief. She saved 4 match points in the 3rd set tiebreak, winning 7-6 with a scoreline of 13-11. The crowd was delirious. Her prize money from that single tournament was $154,000, a figure that would have seemed like fantasy just a year earlier. By the end of 2025, she had posted a 40-26 record, cracked the top 50, and firmly established herself as the most significant figure in Philippine sports. Now fast forward to 2026, and the picture becomes even more dramatic. Eala began the season ranked in the 40s, but by mid-March she had surged to a career-high world #29. The first Filipino to break into the top 30. That climb was fueled by a series of results that read like something you would fabricate for a movie script. At the Dubai Championships in February, she dismantled Jasmine Paolini, the world #8 at the time, 6-1, 7-6. That was her 3rd career victory over a top 10 opponent, and she earned it with a display of baseline violence that left the Italian visibly shaken. Eala's forehand, a whipping left-handed stroke that generates enormous spin and pace from a compact swing, was virtually unplayable that evening. She took the first set in barely 20 minutes. Then came Indian Wells. This is where the narrative gets truly interesting and where the Sabalenka thread begins to tighten. Eala entered as the 31st seed, the highest seeding of her career at a WTA 1000 event. She received a first-round bye and then drew Diana Yastremska in the 2nd round. It was not a straightforward affair. Eala won the first set 7-5, dropped the second 6-4, and then found herself trailing 5-4 in the decider. 3 games from elimination. What happened next was pure theater. She won the final 3 games of the match, closing it out 7-5 in the 3rd just before midnight, to the delight of a packed stadium court crowd that had stayed late specifically to see her play. That is not normal. Players ranked in the 30s do not fill stadiums at 11 o'clock at night. Eala does. The Filipino diaspora and a rapidly growing global fan base have turned her into one of the biggest draws in women's tennis, a fact that even the tournament organizers acknowledged when they consistently scheduled her on the biggest courts. Her third-round opponent was Coco Gauff, the world number 4. And for a set and change, Eala was magnificent. She broke Gauff early in the first set and never relinquished control, winning it 6-2 with a combination of deep returns and aggressive court positioning that pushed the American into constant defensive scrambles. When Eala broke again to lead 2-0 in the second, Gauff stopped. She retired with a left arm injury after 54 minutes, only the second time in her career she had ever withdrawn from a match. Now, the retirement muddied the waters somewhat, and full credit to Gauff for being transparent about the injury. But what cannot be overlooked is how dominant Eala looked before the stoppage. She was not sneaking past a struggling opponent. She was beating one of the best players on the planet with clean, authoritative tennis. The round of 16 brought Linda Noskova, the 14th seed from the Czech Republic, and this is where reality delivered its harshest lesson. Noskova, a tall, powerful player with a booming serve and a game built for hard courts, overwhelmed Eala 6-2, 6-0 in 55 minutes. She hit 7 aces and saved the only break point she faced. It was a clinical demolition. Eala won just 2 games. For any other player, this kind of loss might prompt whispered questions about whether the earlier results were a mirage, but for Eala, it was something different. It was a signpost. Not of fragility, but of the specific challenge that awaits her at the very top of the sport, where the margin between winning and losing is razor-thin, and where physical power married to tactical precision can erase even the most confident game plan. And this is precisely where Aryna Sabalenka enters the conversation. Sabalenka went on to win that Indian Wells title, beating Elena Rybakina in a thrilling 3-set final, 3-6, 6-3, 7-6. She was a force throughout the fortnight, dispatching Naomi Osaka, Victoria Mboko, and Noskova herself with a brand of controlled aggression that has become her calling card. At 27 years old, Sabalenka sits at the summit of women's tennis with 4 Grand Slam titles, a stranglehold on the world #1 ranking, and a game that combines thunderous ground strokes with improved court craft and a serve that regularly clocks above 110 miles per hour. She is, by any reasonable assessment, the most complete player in the women's game right now. So, what happens when these two collide? Because make no mistake, that collision is coming. Eala herself has named Sabalenka as one of her dream opponents, alongside Serena Williams and Maria Sharapova. She said this at the Miami Open just days ago, with a calm certainty that suggested she views the matchup not as an aspirational fantasy, but as an inevitability she is actively preparing for. Let us analyze how this hypothetical plays out from a tactical standpoint, because the matchup is genuinely fascinating. Eala is a left-hander. That fact alone changes the geometry of every rally. Her cross-court forehand naturally targets Sabalenka's backhand, which, while improved enormously over the past 2 years, remains the more vulnerable wing when subjected to sustained pressure from an awkward angle. Sabalenka's preferred pattern is to dominate with her forehand from the middle of the court, pulling opponents wide and then finishing with an inside-out winner or a punishing volley. Against a lefty who redirects the ball with that distinctive topspin arc, those patterns become harder to establish. Eala's court positioning is also a factor. She stands closer to the baseline than most players her age, a trait clearly influenced by her years at the Nadal Academy. This aggressive stance allows her to take time away from opponents, particularly on the return of serve. Against Sabalenka's first serve, which is one of the biggest weapons in the sport, this positioning is a double-edged sword. Miss the timing and you are punished. Get it right, and you neutralize one of the Belarusian's primary advantages. The mental dimension is where things get truly compelling. Sabalenka has evolved from a player who routinely imploded under pressure into one of the most mentally resilient competitors on tour. Her transformation, which began in earnest around 2023, has been remarkable. She manages emotions better, she closes out tight sets more efficiently, and she rarely gives opponents free points through unforced errors the way she once did. Eala, meanwhile, has demonstrated extraordinary composure in high-pressure situations for someone so young. That US Open tiebreak against Tauson, the late-night comeback against Yastremska, the controlled demolition of Swiatek at Miami. These are not the performances of a player who folds when the stakes rise. But there is a difference between performing under pressure against opponents who are themselves feeling the weight of the moment and performing under pressure against Sabalenka, who at this stage of her career has learned how to weaponize pressure itself. When Sabalenka smells blood in a match, she attacks with a ferocity that very few players can withstand. Her ability to raise her level in critical moments, particularly on big points and in tiebreaks, is a skill that has been refined through years of Grand Slam experience. Eala has not yet faced that kind of sustained, suffocating intensity from across the net. There is also the physical dimension to consider. Sabalenka stands 6 feet tall and generates pace from a position of structural advantage. Eala, while athletic and quick, does not possess the same raw power. Her game relies more on timing, placement, and variation, using angles and spin to disrupt rhythm rather than overpowering opponents with sheer force. In a 3-set slugfest against Sabalenka, the physical demands could be immense. Whether Eala can maintain her shot quality deep into a grueling 3rd set against someone hitting as hard as Sabalenka is an open question. But here is the thing. Every question mark hovering over Eala right now is one that hovered over her before Miami 2025. Can she handle the big stage? She answered that. Can she beat top 10 players? She has beaten multiple. Can she sustain her level beyond one magical tournament run? The 2026 season has already answered that emphatically. Dubai quarterfinals. Indian Wells round of 16 as a seeded player. Back-to-back deep runs at WTA 1000 events. A ranking that has climbed from the 40s to the 20s in the space of a few weeks. The trajectory is unmistakable. What happened at the Miami Open this year tells us something important about where Eala stands. She entered the tournament with roughly 390 ranking points to defend from her semi-final run the previous year. That is an enormous amount of pressure for a young player. She navigated the early rounds impressively, beating Laura Siegemund and then Magda Linette to reach the round of 16, before running into Karolina Muchova, who administered a 6-0, 6-2 defeat. It was a harsh scoreline, reminiscent of the Noskova loss at Indian Wells. 2 heavy defeats in the space of 2 weeks against top-tier opponents expose a pattern that Eala and her team will need to address. When she faces players who can match or exceed her baseline depth while also serving at a high level, her game can become compressed. She gets pushed deeper behind the baseline, her forehand loses its penetration, and the angles that are normally her greatest weapon become unavailable. This is the gap between where Eala is now and where she needs to be to genuinely threaten someone like Sabalenka. It is not an insurmountable gap. In fact, it is a surprisingly narrow one. The raw talent is there. The competitive mentality is there. The tactical intelligence is clearly there. What she needs is the physical development and the technical refinement to sustain her aggressive game plan against opponents who refuse to give her space. That might mean adding more variety to her serve, developing a more effective net game to shorten points against power hitters, or simply continuing to build the physical endurance required to hit with authority for 2.5 hours. Here is what the tennis world should not overlook. The practice session between Eala and Sabalenka at Miami this year was, by multiple accounts, genuinely competitive. Sabalenka herself was reportedly impressed by the Filipinos' dedication, her willingness to practice in adverse conditions while other top players waited for better weather. That is not a trivial detail. Sabalenka knows what elite dedication looks like. She has built her career on it. For her to take note of Eala's work ethic speaks volumes about how the young Filipino is perceived within the locker room. The broader significance of Eala's rise extends beyond the tennis court. She is carrying an entire country with her. The Philippines, a nation of over 100 million people, has never produced a tennis player of this caliber. Eala is not just the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA history. She is a cultural phenomenon. Her matches draw television ratings in the Philippines that rival major sporting events. Her social media following has exploded. Indian Wells organizers noted the dramatic increase in Filipino fans attending the tournament specifically to see her play. This kind of grassroots support creates a feedback loop. The bigger the crowds, the bigger the energy. The bigger the energy, the better Eala seems to play. She feeds off it in a way that reminds observers of how Rafa Nadal channeled crowd support into competitive fuel. The question of whether Alex Eala can stun Aryna Sabalenka is not really about whether she can win a single match. Upsets happen in tennis all the time. A player like Eala, with her lefty angles and her fearless mentality, could absolutely take a set or even a match off Sabalenka on the right day, on the right surface, with the right crowd behind her. The deeper question is whether Eala can develop into a player who consistently competes with the Sabalenkas of the world, not just in isolated moments of brilliance, but tournament after tournament, year after year, at the very summit of the sport. Everything we have seen suggests the answer is trending toward yes. She arrived from nowhere a year ago. She stunned Swiatek. She made history for her country at the US Open. She climbed into the top 30. She practices on Christmas Eve and during rainstorms. She names the world #1 as her dream opponent without a trace of intimidation. The tennis world is not actually in chaos because of Alex Eala. The tennis world is waking up to the reality that the next great rivalry in women's tennis might involve a left-hander from the Philippines who trained in Mallorca and who, sooner or later, is going to stand across the net from Aryna Sabalenka with nothing between them but a coin toss and 3 sets of tennis. When that day comes, and it will, the question will not be whether Eala belongs on that court. She has already answered that. The question will be whether Sabalenka is ready for what is coming.